Well, hello everybody and welcome to another episode. Today I'm going to show you 4 fully featured film SLRs, and if you're fairly new to photography and you're serious about it, you should try some film. Film is where it all began. It's a different way of doing photography. It's slower, it's more zen. It means you've got to plan your shots and think a lot more carefully about what you're doing, and it gives you the fantastic look of film which nothing can match. An SLR is a good place to start because there are many similarities with a DSLR that you might have used already. Even fully manual SLRs with no automation at all are still going to feel familiar. It's not going to be a great big jump from a DSLR or a mirrorless digital to a film SLR. So we're going to look at 2 fully manual SLRs today, and we're going to look at 2 auto exposure cameras. And so we've got the Konica FS1 over here, we've got the, where are we now, the Olympus OM10, we've got the Vivitar V3000, and we've also got the Chinon Prinzflex TTL. So let's look at our first film camera for today, and that's this one. It's the Vivitar V3000. This is an all-manual camera, and it was a bit of an anachronism in its time, actually. It was released in the mid-90s. And it was made right up until the mid-2000s, and it was very widely used by photography students. It's a simple camera. It's a no-frills, fairly cheap camera. It has a plastic body, but it's none the worse for that. It's stood up to the test of time very well. This one's been used by an art and design college, and it's got Art and Design 03 on it. Highbury College, PO62SA. I don't know if you can see that on there, but this must have been a great machine for learning photography on and teaching photography with, because it's so simple and it teaches you the basics. It's all manual and it forces you to understand light, and that's the great boon of starting to learn with an all manual film camera. You will learn those basics, and if you're snapping away on an auto camera, you're not necessarily going to learn that. You'll learn about composition and other things for sure, but it's not going to teach you about light. This camera will teach you about light. It's fairly well spec'd as well. It has a shutter speed dial on the top deck here, over here, and as you can see, it runs from 1 second to all the way up to 1/2000th of a second. It still works fine. There's no problem with any of its mechanicals. If we open it up, we'll see that, and it opens by the this is a convention on all film SLRs, almost all anyway, that if you pull up the film rewind crank, that's that will open the back up for you. So inside it we can see a metal shutter. I believe this camera was based on a Yashica chassis. There's our metal shutter working away. So it was based on a very well-known design, and it's a pretty reliable little machine. It's very simple. There are no frills with it. It's all manual. It has a battery compartment here for the light meter. The light meter appears inside the viewfinder as a little needle, tells you what settings you need to set for the available light. It's made in the classic style, and that's quite unusual for such a late camera. With the advent of the Canon T90 in the mid-90s, a lot of manufacturers went over to the more rounded shapes that we see on DSLRs these days. Vivitar clearly didn't, and they've kept turning out this style which does very much fulfill the classical requirements of an SLR appearance. It looks like a classical SLR. Perhaps the best thing about this camera is its lens mount. It's a K mount, and that means, how do I get it off? That means that this camera will accept thousands and thousands of lenses from Pentax, lenses from a whole bunch of third-party manufacturers. This was a very, very, very widely used mount. It's a bayonet mount. I don't know if we can get this little camera to focus, can we? Focus, please. There we are. We can see the K bayonet mount there. Nice simple design, and it allows you to use thousands and thousands of lenses. There were so many lenses made in this mount. So from availability of lenses, this is a fantastic camera. You'll never go short of lenses with a K-mount camera. As far as price goes, I paid £20 for this little marvel. It's got all the classic styling, it's simple, it's straightforward, it's reliable, it's not complex, it's an all mechanical camera, so you're not likely to face electronics breakdowns that effectively render it scrap. This is a camera that's going to stay working for a long, long time, and because it's so simple, I think it's going to face fewer complications and breakdowns than more complex cameras will. This is a really nice little machine. Now here's a lovely little camera that I picked up a little while ago. This is the Chinon Prinzflex TTL. It's a mid-60s camera as far as I've been able to find out. There's not too much information about this one online. But I have established that it's a mid-60s camera, and it's from a time when the classic SLR look and design was established. So we've got the prism on top, the silver top and bottom, the black body, and this design would endure until, well, really until the Canon T90 of the mid-80s, I think, late 80s. Do correct me if that's wrong, but it was late 80s, early 90s. The Canon T90 arrived and did away with all these nice straight edges and the classic camera style. This is a very simple camera. It's an all-manual camera, meaning it has no electronics at all, apart from the light meter, which is a simple needle affair and appears in the viewfinder at the back here when you look through the camera. It's very, very simple, very clear, very clean, very uncluttered. You can see that the top deck, focus please camera, thank you. You can see that the top deck is really clear. The only thing on it really of any note is the shutter button here, the wind on and the film rewind. The shutter speeds are on this dial on the front, and they go from 1 second to 1,000th of a second and B. So it's a very simple, very straightforward machine. One thing that surprised me about this camera is its quality. Chinon were a manufacturer from the budget end of the market, and they sold their cameras through in the UK anyway, a chain of stores called Dixon's, and they were the cheaper cameras in Dixon's, along with the more expensive Nikons, Canons and Olympuses. However, this camera does not feel like a cheap camera. This camera feels really, really expensive. It's very, very nicely made. Everything's so precise. The engraving is beautiful. The action of the controls is precise and simple. The shutter sound is quite loud. But everything points to this camera being a really, really upmarket piece of kit. And this is really surprising. And actually, the one it bears most resemblance to is one of these. This is a Pentax camera. This is the Asahi Pentax SP5000, but they did various specs in similar bodies, and I don't know if you can see there, they're very, very similar indeed. They even have the same fitting to fit the hot shoe. It's a piece of metal that slides down over the eyepiece, so that's the same too. And it really does feel like a Pentax camera. That similarity continues with the lens. So this lens is almost identical to a Pentax. Just incredible. The machining on the barrel is the same. The length of the lenses is the same. The maximum aperture of the two lenses is the same. These are, I think, the same lens, and it looks to me very much like there's been some exchange going on between Pentax and Chinon at that time. And the one has clearly been influenced by the other, and it may be that the one has actually been made by the other, though which has been made by whom I really can't say. Big difference to the Pentax cameras we see when we open up the back. And there we've got a metal shutter, a metal blind shutter, rather than the Pentax cloth shutter, like a style design cloth shutter. This one's working perfectly if I shoot it on a slow speed. You can hear that lovely clockwork mechanism that is the only way an all-mechanical camera can regulate slower speeds, or at least that's the way that it's usually done. This camera, in terms of cost, how much did it cost me? It cost me £20. And this is a very high quality camera, very high quality manual camera with a very high quality lens. It's an M42 lens mount, which means that you can mount any lens out of hundreds and thousands and possibly even tens of thousands that were made in this mount. There were thousands of lenses made in M42 mounts, so there's absolutely no shortage of lenses to use on this little camera. This is a really, really nice piece of kit, well worth £20. These are not prestige machines, so they're not going to command higher prices, and you're likely to find one of these at a real bargain price. I would imagine wherever in the world they were exported to originally. Very nice little piece of kit. This is one I intend to keep, actually. I didn't expect intending to keep this, but I am going to keep this one because it's just such a unexpectedly nice little camera. Our third camera today is one of my favourites. It's the Olympus OM10, a most beautiful little machine. And when I say little, it really is little. It's a very small camera. Certainly if we compare it to the previous cameras that we've looked at today. This is an aperture priority auto exposure camera. What does aperture priority mean? Well, it's very simple. It just means that you set the aperture on your camera. Let's say we want 5.6 today, and you wind on and you press the button, and when you shoot, the camera will choose the shutter speed for you, the correct shutter speed for the light. So you set your aperture and the camera does the rest. It does shoot manual as well, but you have to buy a little extra. You have to buy this little manual adapter that I've got on this camera here, and it's just a little piece of kit with, I think it's an electrical control really is all it is, that has the shutter speeds marked around the edge there, and as you change them it will shoot in those manual speeds. It's a great little thing. It just pushes onto the camera and pulls off. So like this is how it was supplied as new. Like this, it's auto exposure only, aperture priority, and when we pop the little fella on, it's got a little jack plug on the back there, if you can see that, and we put that into there, give it a little push, and there we are. So we've now got a manual and aperture priority auto exposure camera. I don't need to say, of course, that this has the classic camera look. In fact, I think the Olympus cameras are some of the nicest looking SLRs that were ever made. They're beautifully small, they're beautifully proportioned, they're very precise, everything works nicely and cleanly and smoothly. They're really, really well made cameras. The top deck is a little more busy than the cameras we've looked at. Focus, please. Thank you. So what we've got the wind lever, the shutter button, we've got the switch to switch between auto and the manual adapter, as well as the film speed selector and exposure compensation dial here, all in one. And then we've got the film rewind, pull up to open the back, as always, and we've also got the on-off switch here. Opening the back, we see that this camera, like all the OM cameras, has a Leica style cloth shutter. It's very reliable. It doesn't give any trouble in my experience. These are very reliable machines, and generally speaking, they don't really go wrong. The only thing you might find that you need to do, and this is the case with any classic SLR that you get, is to renew the light seals, and those are little strips of foam rubber that go in these slots here, one here and one down the bottom here where the door fixes, where the door closes, and there's another strip here along the side. Perhaps the greatest thing about these cameras is the lenses. These are the Zuiko, Olympus Zuiko lenses. These are beautiful lenses, and they may just be my favourite lenses altogether and all told. They're just so beautiful. They look fantastic. They were very nice looking lenses, and I do think aesthetics are actually quite important in camera gear. It actually helps me to create. If I like my gear, if I love my gear, if I can bond with the gear, and I do think aesthetics are part of that. This is a very, very nice looking camera. It's also a very nicely engineered camera, but you know, it really is one of the nicest looking camera systems around, and that helps me to do photography. That helps me to bond with my gear and to have ideas and to become part of the camera, if that doesn't sound too silly, as far as I can do. As far as cost goes, these cameras go for around £40 to £60. That is a real bargain. This is an Olympus OM SLR. It takes Zuiko lenses, and you can buy one with a 50mm f1.8 for about 40 to 60 quid. What more could you ask for? Here is our final camera for today. This is the Konica FS1, and this is a camera that I bought fairly recently, and it's surprisingly nice. It has shutter priority auto exposure, and you can also use it on manual. Shutter priority is where you set your shutter speed, decide the shutter speed you want. It's got a nice big dial here on top. Can we focus, please, Mr. GH2? Thank you. It's got a nice big dial on top with very, very clearly marked speeds. I can see those speeds without my glasses, so if your eyesight's not quite as good as it was 1 or 2 years ago, this is a good camera because the markings are quite large and quite clear. So you set your shutter speed in shutter priority, and the camera chooses the aperture. It's a good system, it works fine, and it's reliable. Personally, I prefer aperture priority, but shutter priority is very useful when you want to make sure of getting a certain shutter speed. If you want a particularly fast shutter speed, for example, to freeze movement, or a particularly slow shutter speed to cause a bit of blur. That's the approach Konica took. Set the shutter speed and the aperture will take care of itself. You can see the design evolving from the classic camera design, the classic SLR design. It's got this little bit hooked onto the end there, this little piece here, so it's wider by so much than most of the classic SLR designs, but it's still pretty nice looking, and I think it's still, despite its change in size and its change in style, it's still managed to retain some nice proportions. The reason for this extra bit on the side here is that this is the battery grip, the battery housing rather, and it does make a very nice grip. This camera is very good to hold. You can hold it very easily with one hand, set your shutter speed values with one finger, and operate the shutter also with one finger. This camera needs batteries. It works on 2 AAs, and it needs batteries because it has an electronic wind, and because of that electronic wind it makes a really, really cool sound. Listen to this. I think that's a wonderful camera sound. I don't know, those little details are important to me. It doesn't rewind electrically. It has the standard rewind crank on the end here, and again standard, actually no it's not, you don't pull up the crank. What you do on this one is another method that was very often used, is you pull down this little catch here to open the back, and there's the back of the camera, and you can see it has a metal shutter. Let's have a look at that shutter in operation. A very nice mechanism, very well made, and still working after all these years. I think this is it may be a DX camera. No, I don't think it is. This is not a DX coded camera, so you do have to key in the film speed requirements yourself, and that's on this little dial here in the center of the shutter dial, shutter speed dial. It's automatic wind on. It's also automatic film loading. You just pop the canister in here, draw the leader across, close the door, and the camera does its electronic thing, and your film is loaded. This is a really nice camera. Perhaps the best thing about it is what goes on the front. Konica Hexanon lenses. These lenses are just absolutely beautiful. I've reviewed 4 of them recently. The 28mm f3.5, the 50mm, I think it's f1.9, the 135mm f3.2, and this one, the 40mm f1.8. And I reckon of those 4, I reckon this 40mm f1.8 lens is the best, far and away the best. I love the 40mm focal length. It works really, really well on the street. I don't know why that should be. Sometimes 35 seems to me a little bit too wide, whereas 50 can be a little bit too long. 40mm seems a perfect compromise, and this is a really good lens. The Hexanons are very, very fine optics. This little 40mm stands up really well to the Voigtlander 40mm that I tested a couple of months back, 2 or 3 months back maybe. It's not quite as accomplished as that lens, but it's very nearly there. It's 90 to 95% similar. As far as price goes, this camera I bought for £50 with 2 lenses. I bought 2 other Hexanon lenses for, I think it was about £40. Konica kit is not expensive, and it's a great way into SLR, film SLR ownership. A very nice little piece of kit indeed. So there we are, 4 wondrous, lovely little film cameras, and they can be yours from £20 for the cheaper pair to £40 to £60 for the auto exposure pair. If you've never tried film before, I do urge that you try it. It's where photography came from. It's where a lot of the conventions of digital photography came from, and it's an entirely different way of making images. I think it will make you a better photographer. And if you want to dip a toe into the waters, any of these 4 cameras will do you fine. So that's it from me for now. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring that bell before you go. And if you like the content on this channel and you'd like to help it grow and develop, you can do that at patreon.com/Zenography. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time for some more Zenography.